Today has been a day of boat maintenance and some curious things which I'd be interested to hear from you guys out there in the comments as to why this is happening. First of all, the AIS and the VHF saga. I've put our new antenna, which we received through the post the other day, directly onto the AIS unit with a 2-meter cable that literally just runs into the cockpit. And immediately I was able to pick up vessels anchored out in the town anchorage, which is, well, it's still only a couple of miles away, but it's behind buildings. If you remember, we had a splitter booster unit. So the idea was this split one antenna and fed it to the VHF and the AIS, but it came with a booster as well. To compensate for that split. I'm now just running the VHF directly up to the antenna on the main mast and bypassing the splitter booster altogether, but I thought I would just put it back on to the AIS so that it's just being boosted and not split. And I'm seeing even more targets now, and this is again with the antenna just on a 2-meter cable into the cockpit, and I'm seeing targets. I'm looking at it now. I can actually see targets behind Galley Island. Now, admittedly, these are, of course, commercial vessels, so they have much more powerful transmitters. But what is encouraging is that marinetraffic.com has also recorded our position. So this is good. This means that there's clearly an issue from the AIS unit to the top of the mizzen mast, which is where the antenna sits for the AIS. I'm hoping it's not the cable. I'm hoping it is just the antenna, because I think this is a straight swap. So what we need to do next is to go up the mizzen mast and swap the antenna. Top of the mizzen mast. Got to sort out this AIS. Sorry, I'm just doing a bit of vlogging at the top of the mast. Before Roy and Liz, they've managed to get me up the mizzen mast. Took a bit. I've obviously put on a bit of weight since I last went up. Last couple of times Liz went up. Anyway, what we're doing is swapping the antenna for the AIS. I think I explained that I did a little test with the new antenna, plugged in directly into the AIS and managed to pick up new signals. So the test now is to replace it. It's just there, and then we'll give it another test and see, hopefully, that it is the antenna and not the cable that's running between the antenna and the AIS. So let's give this a go. What's confusing me is the VHF. So Sharon and Lindsay on Songlines 3 have actually gone out to anchor. They're anchored just this side of Gaia, so they are literally, what, 2 miles away, if that. I can't see them on AIS, but their AIS target's being picked up by marinetraffic.com. This could just be a limitation of Class B transponders, of course. So you can see the commercial vessels, but smaller vessels you can't really see until you literally have line of sight, which we don't have with them. But the curious thing is the VHF. They're sitting at anchor, and I broadcast through on channel 7.1 and didn't hear back from them. And then I got a text message from Sharon to say that they could hear us loud and clear. And she was replying, but we couldn't hear her. So your instinct is to say, well, our unit is transmitting, but it's not receiving. And yet, if we use the handheld VHF, and Liz and I did this test a couple of weeks ago, where I walked out to the golf club, again, not too far away, but still behind buildings, and we had a perfectly normal conversation between the VHF and the handheld. So why is it that they can hear us at anchor nice and clearly, and I can't hear them at all? One suggestion is that perhaps it's a fault with their unit, that perhaps they're not transmitting properly. But if I use the handheld, I can have a conversation with them in the cockpit. So not entirely sure what's going on here. It's very, very odd. There doesn't seem to be any logic to this, because it seems as if our VHF is transmitting. Maybe it's just not transmitting very powerfully. Who knows? Perhaps the next thing I should do is to check the voltage going into the VHF unit, but yeah, I can't work that out. Hello, look where I am. It's the next day. It's actually 2 days later. I'm back up the mast. After doing my little recording yesterday, I realised that the problem that we've got is that the AIS antenna is encapsulated. It's all in one. Obviously this is to weatherproof it, but the problem, of course, is that I can't just unscrew it, take it off and put a new antenna up. So today I've got to snip it and fit a new connector on it, and this means doing a bit of soldering, which is not ideal at the top of a mast. Fortunately, Roy has lent us his gas soldering iron, which makes things a little bit easier. Many years ago I spent 4 hours up this mast installing our radar, and I remember having to run cables, extension cables, up to the radar in order to do the soldering, and it really was very difficult. So I'm hoping this should be a little bit easier, and I certainly don't intend to spend 4 hours up here. This, in theory, on paper, is a very straightforward job. It's always very different when you are, what, 10 meters up or 15 meters up or whatever it is. Okay, I have done the best that I can. Don't forget, I'm trying to solder effectively upside down, or from underneath at least, so it's quite difficult to get the thing upright to allow the solder to run down inside the tip. So anyway, I managed to get some solder on, but I won't know if it fits until, of course, I put the new antenna on, and that is coming up the mast sometime very soon. Meanwhile, we've had a problem with the bilge pump. The bilge pump stopped working. I looked in the bilges yesterday, and they were full up with water, because when it rains the water comes through our main mast, because it's a kill step mast, so it drains down into the bilge, and they were full up with water. So I checked the bilge pump, not working. Checked the fuses, checked to see if there was voltage going to the switch, and this is when I started getting confused, because you've got two switches. You've got your automatic switch here, which relies on the float switch to complete the circuit, but there's also a manual override as well, and that wasn't working. The first thing I did was just check some schematics, some wiring schematics, just so I can check at each point. I then went and checked the pump. We're getting voltage to the pump, not turning on though. So two things: either the pump has blown altogether, or perhaps there's a bit of corrosion and there's not enough voltage getting to it. So I need to strip the cables on that first. Meanwhile, I'm about to order another pump just as carry as a spare anyway. Thirdly, the most crucial, most important and most worrying is that when I was checking the bilge pump, I looked down at our flexible coupling mounting. Two 12mm bolts that go through a bulkhead retain that flexible coupling, the housing, against the bulkhead. One of them had disappeared. It had completely sheared off, and it had sheared off at the nut. That's not good. That's really not good. And when you look at the corrosion, and I haven't got the bolt with me because I've actually left it at a workshop, it appears as if the corrosion happened at the nut. So I'm guessing some kind of crevice corrosion. Who knows when that happened? That's the worrying thing. Did that happen the moment we went back in the water this time last year after our haul out? Or did it happen more recently? Because the problem here is that that whole housing could shift, it could move. You've got the shaft going into it, and that connects to the gearbox. If that moves, that could cock up something. It's impossible to find 316 and not easy to get 304 here, so I had to go up to a supplier who didn't have them in stock. So I went to a machine shop, and he hopefully will be machining me some new bolts, and I'm getting some spares as well. That's all in literally the space of 3 hours. Everything I've just explained has happened in 3 hours. I'm kind of glad that the bilge pump stopped working, because I don't know if I would have spotted this and until just before we'd left. Of course, this is something that should be checked regularly anyway. All of these kind of fittings and mounts should be checked regularly. Just got complacent being in the Marina. So yeah, there we go. So there's a little update. Not much else to add really, except I have now got to get up the mizzen mast, strip back the wiring on the pump, and wait for those bolts to be manufactured locally.
I also have an update, and it's much more exciting than bolts and pumps. We'd decided that our galley worktop was so knackered it needed replacing, so we called in Hans, a carpenter and electrician by trade, to come and size up a new countertop for us. At 30 years old, our double stainless sink was developing pinprick leaks. More importantly, we were getting fed up with the protruding lip that made wiping the surface clean difficult. Perhaps Hans would be able to install a countersunk sink. He managed to source a corian-like material locally, He was confident that he could simply lay the new surface on top of the old one without any structural damage to the unit. He came over to build a template, and watching him at work took us back to the days of our refit with our Thai carpenters Pong, Tong and Tui. Hans also agreed to repair our ageing teak floorboard in the heads. Strange though it may seem, teak is difficult to source here in Borneo, so we salvaged as much of the original wood as we could and added a few new bits Hans had knocking around his workshop. Once he'd completed his template, Hans returned to his workshop to cut the Korean substitute, which freed up the galley for Jamie to do some basic engine checks and filter replacements.
Bloody ducks. Right, quick update. I'll explain why I'm naked in a minute, but so follow up on the antenna. It doesn't work. New antenna up the mast, nothing at all. So one can only conclude that it's an issue with the cabling that goes up the mast. Possibly the same for the VHF up the main as well. So I've had to rethink about where we mount the AIS antenna, because running a new cable up the mast with it in situ is just, believe me, it's not possible. So we'll have to think about rewiring that when we next take the mast down, whenever that will be. So what we're doing now is working out where to put a new AIS antenna, and I think we'll put it on the davits. There we go. You see the curve there. There's a bit of strengthening strip of stainless, and I think that would make the perfect mounting spot. Obviously it's not going to be as high as if it were on the mizzen, but Sharon and Lindsay have theirs at about the same height and they're getting good reception. So this now means I've got to work out how to run the cable. This is, I always say I love electronics. I love, I don't have a problem with electrics on a boat, 12-volt electrics. One thing I do not like though is wiring. And that's simply because we have run out of wiring space, and in order to wire anything it normally means taking headboards down, potentially drilling through bulkheads and so on. But I think I have worked out a little route that is actually quite short as well, so it saves running it, looping it and so on. So yesterday mainly Liz cleaned out some of the bilges that's going to be running through, and this morning I've just gone into the lazarette. Lazarette is not my favourite place on Esper because it always gets damp, and so I've just started taking things out, and I've noticed in one of the side conduits it is caked full of oil. It looks like spent oil as well, but I can only assume that this is a split oil carton. Shut up! Go and have a quick look. This is why I'm half naked, by the way. It's a messy job. So that's oil, and I have no idea how that got there. I do carry spare oil containers here, but they are full and sealed, so it just adds to the pain of trying to run this cable. But the idea is that the cable will run through this. Now that is an old RF cable for the an RG cable for the old ham radio that we had that never worked, and so that runs through the stanchion here, down through the lazarette and somewhere into the boat. That's what I'm trying to work out where it goes. But first I've got to clear up some of that shit inside the lazarette. It's another day of getting messy and dirty. Will you shut up?